You're listening to the 10x Your Agency podcast, where every Wednesday for the next 12 weeks, you'll be learning strategies on how to scale up your agency and grow your client base from successful agency owners who've been there, done it, and built a highly successful agency. You'll learn how they attract clients, what their biggest causes of client churn were, and what their challenges were at different stages of building their agency. My name is Marcus Taylor, and I'll be your host. So, to kick off this 12-episode series on agency growth, I've invited my colleague Kristine Wellborn here to interview me on the process that I went through in building up an agency and how we eventually pivoted to where we are today, which is more focused on building up a portfolio of online ventures, including Leadformly, our latest venture, which is a tool that we built to make it easy to create high-converting lead capture forms. How are you doing, Kristine?
Great, thanks. Ready to dive in?
Yeah, ready when you are.
Perfect. First of all, maybe you can briefly share the story behind Venture Harbour and how you took it from a digital agency in the music industry to a company that grows and builds online ventures.
Sure. So Venture Harbour actually, I never really intended it to be an agency. It actually started off as, since I was about 10, 11 years old, I was building these websites in the music industry. I got to a point where I needed to legally put them into their own company. So I started Venture Harbour, as the name suggests, as basically just a holding company for a bunch of ventures. And because I was passionate about the music industry and I was playing in drums in a metal band at the time, and I spent most of my teenage years recording bands in my bedroom, I started to, and through running these websites, I started to get emails from a lot of companies in the music industry saying, "Hi, Marcus, I've seen what you've done with this website. Do you offer marketing consulting or can you help us with our SEO?" And so it kind of naturally evolved into this sort of consultancy agency where we built up a portfolio of clients in the music industry. But I reached a kind of a point at which I've always kind of been really passionate about just building and creating my own websites. And I never really wanted to have lots and lots of clients. Like, I spent a lot of years before building Venture Harbour working at an agency, and I didn't really enjoy the whole sort of client-facing side of it. And so we've kind of, over the years, the clients were great in sort of providing revenue and allowing us to be able to build our own ventures, but we've sort of tried to move more and more towards being a company that basically builds our own clients. We still operate like an agency, but the clients we work on are pretty much just the ventures that we built ourselves. So that's kind of how we've evolved from when we first started 5 years ago to building up the agency and then scaling back to become more of a digital product company.
Sounds really good. And when you were growing Venture's client base, what did you do to acquire new clients and what worked for you best?
So I think public speaking was probably the most effective thing that we did in the early days to acquire new clients. We didn't have a sales team. We didn't have big budgets to do ads. We weren't operating like a big agency. And so we had to be a little bit scrappy and a little bit kind of going after some of the more guerrilla tactics initially. And so I'd say there were two things that worked very well, one of which was public speaking. And what I would say about public speaking, one of the things that I certainly found was that often the smaller events that I spoke at would often actually generate more leads and more clients than speaking at the big conferences. So my kind of hunch for why that is because when you speak at a big event, people assume that you're going to be very busy after your talk. If there's 500 people in a room or 1,000 people in a room, relatively few people come and speak to you afterwards because they assume that everyone else is going to speak to you. Certainly in my experience, you don't end up with too many conversations off the back of those talks. It's great for credibility, not so much for lead gen. Whereas if you speak at like a 50-person or 100-person meetup, you're seen as more accessible. And because of that, you get more people come and speak to you, you get deeper and more higher quality conversations with people that turn into better quality leads and ultimately more clients. So I'd say public speaking was like a real core part of how we acquired leads in the early days. The other thing that worked very well for us was investing in long form quality content. So the Venture Harbour blog has kind of built a bit of a life of its own. The first year, I really believed in content and blogging. And so I spent a year where I think I wrote about 50 articles in 1 year. And for the first year, it didn't really do much for us. But then by the second year, we were starting to see some results. That's now 5 years ago. And the content that we wrote 5 years ago is now generating about 2 to 3 leads a day for us, even though we're no longer really building that part of the business. And so blogging has always been this kind of really nice, it's a very slow burner, but very, very effective in the long run. I've kind of had this rule that I don't believe in content that takes less than 40 hours to create. Just from my personal experience, if you're creating content that is really easy to produce, then within 6 months' time, there's probably going to be 10 different versions of that same piece of content. This, by the way, applies more to evergreen content. So content that is not topical. If we're talking about topical content, that's a different story. But when it comes to things like the best web hosting guide or advice on how to tackle the latest Panda update, if you're an SEO company, that kind of evergreen content, if it takes you less than 40 hours to produce, it's probably not remarkable, and therefore it's probably not going to surface to the top of Google or be remarkable enough that people are going to reach out to you. So remarkable content, public speaking, I'd say are the two most effective things we did.
That sounds really good. Was there anything else? Did you pay for your traffic to attract any customers to your websites?
So we've done paid advertising, particularly Facebook advertising in the past. It's, to be totally honest, it's never really worked out for us on the B2B side, like for agency consulting. In terms of other things that worked, I would say 2 other kind of more tactical things that have been very effective, one of which is webinars. Particularly now with Leadformly, we're seeing webinars working incredibly well. I've sort of noticed a lot of other agencies using webinars are doing very, very well from them. So not necessarily something that we did that worked well for our consulting, but definitely a tactic that I've kind of seen be very effective for our other ventures and also used by other agencies. And forms. We spent a lot of time at Venture Harbour just improving our lead capture forms, and that has had a really big impact for Venture Harbour.
And talking about forms, the research was done purely by you, or did you hire anybody to do your research? And where did you start? Where do you start researching the form stuff?
The form stuff was actually one of our ventures relies very heavily on a form. It's a comparison site in the financial industry. And we noticed that the site was getting a 16% conversion rate. Now, that's very, very good in this industry, but we thought it could be a lot better. And so we actually did a lot of our own testing. We looked at, data from Google Analytics. We used Hotjar, which is an amazing free tool that allows you to actually see how people are using your forms and using your website. And we thought we could do better. And so we actually built a variation of the form, which we A/B tested, and increased the conversion rate to 46%, which was a huge increase. And I mean, that's tripling the number of leads we were getting for that site overnight just by changing the form. And so based on that research, the A/B tests we did around that, we started to then try to improve the forms across some of our other ventures, including the main Venture Harbour site, to increase the number of inquiries that we were getting. And I believe the results that we got from improving the form on ventureharbour.com was we started at 0.96% conversion rate. So basically 1 out of 100 people on the site were, this is excluding blog pages, but 1% of people on the main portion of the site were inquiring about our services. When we improved our lead capture form, that increased to, I think it was like 8.9%. Or 8.6%, but it was a huge, huge increase.
All right, let's just recap for our listeners. So you were investing in talks, you were doing public speaking, and then you were also blogging, and you're still blogging a lot. And you were also researching online conversion lead generation forms. That sounds really good. I'll just thought maybe people want to write it down for themselves. Let's just jump back a little bit. I know you mentioned you spoke at TEDx. Can you share how that came about and what impact it had on Venture Harbour?
Sure. So TEDx was actually a really weird one. So I probably have to go back a little bit. In 2012, I actually moved to Australia for a year. My partner's from Australia. So I spent a year living in Australia with her. And on the way there, I stopped off in Singapore to meet a guy called Derek Sivers, who's kind of one of my, I'm a huge, huge fan of his work and absolutely love. Derek Sivers founded a company called CD Baby, sold it for 22 million, gave it all to charity. Just amazing guy, incredible philosophies on life. And he has one of the most watched TED Talks of all time. So I had the pleasure of spending an hour with Derek in Singapore. And we were talking a lot about comfort zones and how this idea of how you get out of your comfort zones and what impact that has. And I left that conversation, just my mind was spinning with ideas around how to get people to get out of their comfort zones and, whether it would even be possible to measure something like this. Because I've always kind of believed that it was William Edwards Deming who said, you get what you measure, or something along that. I'm paraphrasing, but something like when you measure something, that's what you get. And so I wanted to kind of find a way to actually improve people's comfort zones by giving them a method or a technique to be able to measure it. And so when I got to Australia, I was kind of messing around with some code, and I hired a guy on freelancer.com to build a tool that would actually allow people to measure their comfort zones. This thing cost like $80 to build. I wasn't really thinking about any grand vision for it, but I got this tool built and I just put it out there. This is, it was the ugliest thing in the world, like really awful looking tool, but it went viral. And we had, within a couple of months, I think over 30,000 people had used it to measure their comfort zones. This meant that we had a huge amount of data on what a comfort zone was and how it varied across cultures, age groups, demographics, psychographics, etc. And I just moved to Melbourne and I didn't really know anyone there. I didn't have any friends there. I was trying to kind of build up a network. And one of the people that I actually reached out to was a business coach in Melbourne, a guy called John Yeo. And I had no idea that this guy ran TEDx in Melbourne. And, I just thought that he was doing some cool coaching stuff. So I went out for a coffee with him and he asked me what I was working on, explained the comfort zone calculator. And he said to me, Marcus, I get 365 applications to speak at TEDx a year. I'm only allowed to give away 20 or 30 of those slots. And I want you to be one of those slots. And so I was kind of just stunned at this point.
Wow.
I had no kind of like intention for this thing to blow up. And I'd just been offered to speak at TEDx about this data we'd captured. So that's kind of how it all came about, really. It was kind of a very weird, fluky sort of thing. But in terms of how it's impacted Venture Harbour, I mean, it's obviously really a fantastic thing from a credibility perspective. I think there's this curiosity that a lot of people have around meeting people that have spoken at TED, or because I think TED's caliber for people that speak at TED is quite high. I don't quite know why I don't necessarily think I should fit into that caliber, but I think people have that curiosity, and because of that, it's made it much, much easier to have meetings with really fascinating people, and it's just opened a lot of doors that I think without accolade like TEDx, speaking at TEDx, would definitely be harder. But there's certainly not been like any direct like leads or clients from it. It's all of the benefits from speaking at TEDx have been very indirect. And the other thing I would say is it's made it incredibly easy to speak at other big events. A lot of conference owners and event organizers, they need to know that you're going to turn up for the event, going to deliver a good speech. And having spoken at TEDx is just it saves them so much time, because it's a very good litmus test for them to know that, you're an experienced speaker. I'd say that side of it as well, it's made it a lot easier to do public speaking.
So you would say you were building authority by participating in something like that and recognition for your brand?
Definitely, yeah. I think it's a real big benefit for me personally, and also Venture Harbour as a company to be associated with, to be able to use something like TEDx, just through association. I think that adds quite a lot of credibility. Definitely.
I know you mentioned that you're working on a new venture right now called Leadformly. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and why you created it and how the idea came about?
As I kind of briefly touched on earlier, for a lot of our other ventures, Broker Notes in particular, which is the financial comparison site, we discovered that forms have such a huge impact on conversion rates. That instance, we went from 16% up to 46% conversion rate, tripled leads overnight by improving the form. Venture Harbour, I mentioned we went from 0.96, so basically 1% conversion rate, up to 8% conversion rate. So that's what, 700% increase in leads by improving the form. And across pretty much all of our ventures, we've gone through this process of improving forms, because it's usually the path of least resistance. Like, it's a relatively easy thing to fix that has a huge impact on the bottom line. Now, the challenge that we had in doing that is that, surprisingly, it's actually really difficult to improve forms. The process that we had to go through time and time again with all these ventures was, we had to brief what kind of form we wanted to be built. Then we had to go to a developer, get them to build it, which cost a lot of money because it's all bespoke development work. Had UX designers design the Photoshop PSDs so that it all looked nice. And then we had to kind of apply our own knowledge around conversion optimization to make sure that the form was going to convert well. And so you've got all these different people and departments. You've got UX design, you've got conversion optimization, you've got development. You've kind of got to get them all in the same room to kind of design what the form's going to be like. And we just found that going through that process, it would take us 2 to 3 months to deploy a really good form. And I think the first form we built cost over $8,000 to get built. And we just kind of looked at it and said, there has to be a better way. The ROI is good. Like, it makes sense for us to spend that amount of money and time improving the form, but it shouldn't take months to build an amazing form. It shouldn't cost thousands of dollars. And so we built Leadformly to solve our own problem. It's effectively a tool where you can use a drag and drop interface to build a high converting lead capture form. And so we built it for ourselves and realized a lot of other companies have the same problem, or a lot of companies are using contact forms that were just provided to them by their IT team, or contact forms provided by Salesforce.com or whichever CRM or email tool they're using. And it just seems crazy, having seen the results, that you would leave such an important part of your funnel, such a key thing that has a huge impact on your conversion rate, to an external company or to an IT team that just don't have that knowledge or that experience around UX and conversion that we found to have such a big impact. So the real kind of mission behind Leadformly, what we're trying to achieve on a wider scale is, we want to make it much easier for companies to fix this part of the funnel, to have a leaner, more efficient funnel on their website so that they can 2x, 3x, 4x the number of leads they're getting for their business just by improving the form. So the way that we've kind of done it is Leadformly is basically we have a range of different form templates where we've taken all of these insights that we've learned about how to improve form design from all of the A/B tests we've done. We've baked all of those insights into a set of templates so that all you need to do is then basically choose which template is relevant to your business. And then we've done all of the optimization for you. You can then sort of get up and running really quickly in a matter of hours rather than having to wait months and spend lots of money like we did.
Well, you just proved that it's a great business opportunity. You turn the problem into a business opportunity for yourself, which you've done with the online form builder. And you really narrowed the market. And I don't think there's anything out there focusing specifically on lead generation. And it's good that somebody thought of that. So thank you. I'm sure lots of customers, potential customers and leads will go and check it out.
If there was another form builder that did it, I definitely wouldn't have built this. It would have saved a lot of time if there was something already out there.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Good job.
Before we go on, if you're looking to grow your client base and capture more leads for your agency, then I'd recommend checking out Leadformly. Leadformly is a lead generation tool run by yours truly that enables you to upgrade the forms on your website to conversion optimized forms that are going to increase your conversion rate and help you capture more qualified leads from your website. Using Leadformly, we've seen agencies capture up to 700% more leads. So if you're interested in giving it a try, we have a 14-day free trial that you can check out at leadformly.com. That's leadformly.com. Once again, that's at leadformly.com.
So now I wanted to jump into quick fire questions. And what's your number one book recommendation for agency owners to read?
Okay. There's only one. So, okay, the book that probably had the biggest impact on me when I was growing the agency was Good to Great by Jim Collins. That was probably one of the few books where it completely changed my thinking, completely changed the strategy for growing the agency. Incredible book. I'd highly recommend to all agency owners. If I can have another one though, the other book that I would highly recommend, one of my favorite books of all time, Influenced by Robert Cialdini. Incredible book.
Oh, those sound really good. I actually haven't read those, so I'll add them to my big list of lead generation and conversion and marketing books. What are the two of your favorite tools that, if taken away, would make your job really difficult or impossible to do?
Oh, wow. Okay. If I sort of go back to the agency days, I would say the tools would have to be, well, one of them would have to be Quote Roller. Quote Roller is a tool that makes it really easy to build proposals and get them e-signed online. Not only did this save me a huge amount of time not having to build proposals in Word documents, but it also meant that more of our proposals were getting accepted by clients faster because clients could now e-sign them instead of having to print them off, sign them on paper and stick them in the post. So Quote Roller was an absolute lifesaver. Now, though, I would say probably one of my favorite tools that I couldn't really live without, probably something like Asana. You know, there's so many ideas flying around that having something where you can have that all in a centralized place. I'm kind of toying between Asana and Trello because we use them both quite heavily to sort of just store and manage ideas. So yeah, it would be definitely Quote Roller and then something like Asana or Trello.
So what's one piece of advice you would give to an agency owner who is looking to grow from 6-figure revenue to 7-figure revenue?
Okay, I think it has to come down to getting good at building processes. The difference between a company at 6 figures and one at 7 figures or 7 figures to 8 figures comes down to the quality of your processes. Now, a lot of companies that I've seen fail with processes make the mistake of thinking that if you add more people to something, it builds its own process. Like a lot of companies try to scale by putting more people onto a set of problems. Now, while that can sometimes solve the issue, often as the agency owner or founder, if you don't really understand the problem, adding more people to fix that problem doesn't really make it any better. I found that you have to really understand the problem. You have to probably do it yourself for a while to understand where it breaks, understand the nuances of how you actually solve that problem. And only when you fully understand it, can you then build the right process around it, get the right people to then take charge of that process, and that's when you can scale up. And, you know, for something like an agency where you constantly have to balance bringing new clients on board and acquisition with retention, it's so important to have systems. You can't just rely on putting salespeople out there to bring on more clients and then cross your fingers and do good work to keep the clients around. There has to be very, very solid processes in place to ensure so that you can predict 3 months in the future, 6 months in the future, where the company is going to be, both revenue-wise, retention-wise, number of new leads. And when you have all those processes to predict what all those numbers are going to be, that's when you can really afford to scale up, particularly grow an order of magnitude, whether that's 6 to 7 figures, 7 to 8, or potentially even 8 to 9. I think it really comes down to the quality of those processes.
Yeah, talking about processes, what were your biggest causes for client churn in the early days when you were growing?
I think it has to be probably the same issue that I think, you know, every agency faces is communication. We're as guilty as most agencies in that we weren't communicating to our clients as well as we should have been. I'm kind of one of these, I'd almost say prima donna people where I like to believe that if the work is good and the quality of the work delivered is exceptional, that the client will be happy. But as we all know, that's rarely the case. You know, you can deliver really great work, but if you're not communicating with the client properly or you're not actively nurturing those relationships, the client may not understand that or may not even see that you've delivered exceptional work. So I think definitely for us, the biggest cause of churn was kind of focusing too much on the quality of work at the expense of communicating and building those relationships with clients. And that led to churn. And again, going back to my previous answer, I think the solution to that is not just kind of saying, yes, we need to communicate with our clients more, or we need more account managers. I think it comes down to processes, putting processes, almost building a CRM system for the account managers so that they know when to get in contact with those customers. So that there's always, you know, when you have salespeople, there's that rule that a salesperson should always know when they're next contacting, when they're next following up with them. I think the same should be true with account managers. You should always know when are you next checking up on that customer, and you should have scoring systems to know what is the health of a client. One thing that we've actually learned, particularly with Leadformly, like building software as a service, there's a concept of customer success where you're constantly measuring the health of a customer and seeing how close they are to achieving their desired outcome. I think if agencies applied the same mentality of actively monitoring the health and success of clients and looking at it in real time, I think that would be a huge, huge advantage for agencies. It's definitely something that I wish that I knew about a couple of years ago when I was growing the agency.
That's a good lesson to learn, for sure. But if we talk about something positive, what's the one thing that you're proud most while building Venture Harbour, or maybe right now, this particular moment?
I mean, I think there's sort of two parts to it that I'm most proud of that are kind of very connected. And it comes down to building a place that I believe is nice to come to work to. Like I absolutely love coming to work. We spent a lot of effort and resources trying to make the office a really nice working environment. We're actually based in the middle of the countryside in between Oxford and Reading in the UK. We have beautiful offices. I think really focusing on that and building up a really amazing team here is something that I'm personally very proud of, and something that every employer, every agency owner can relate to. Is there's something really rewarding about providing jobs. I think just creating something out of nothing that then provides opportunities for yourself and for others is a very rewarding experience and thing to go through. And often, the busyness of the agency can sometimes distract you from that. But when you take a step back and think about what you've actually created, for me personally, that's something that when I do get those opportunities to stop and think about it, it's very rewarding.
That sounds really positive. I'm sure your colleagues and teammates are very happy. I wanted to ask you a few more things about Venture Harbour. What's next for Venture Harbour? What are the plans?
Leadformly is kind of our main focus at the moment. We're sort of fully focused on that right now, trying to build up. We've started to get quite a lot of initial traction from customers. So we're starting to think about how we're going to scale that up. And that's going to be a big part of the next 6 to 12 months, is sort of focusing on that. It's going to be more of the same at a bigger level. We've got to a point where Venture Harbour is this nice vehicle and this kind of breeding ground for coming up with innovative new projects, where once or twice a year, we'll kind of collectively agree on an idea and then we'll build it. I sort of think over the next 2, 3, 5 years, it's just going to be the same sort of thing, like creating these amazing ventures, but at a more ambitious level. And that's something that I'm really excited about, because every time we build a new venture, it's more ambitious, it's more challenging, which means that we're all growing personally as well as professionally.
Sounds really good. Thank you for sharing. But what can we expect from this podcast? I know you started and you'll do the series of 12 episodes. What we can expect from the podcasts?
When I was growing the agency, there weren't many resources around for agency owners to actually learn how do you grow an agency. I was very lucky in that where we're based we're only 45 minutes from London, and though there'd occasionally be some kind of event or meetup for agency owners to learn from one another. But even still, there's a real shortage of information out there on how do you acquire clients for an agency? How do you prevent clients from churning? And so I wanted to create this podcast to kind of share some of the things that I've learned and to interview some of the most successful agency owners around, and the agency owners that are doing things differently. I want to kind of connect with agency owners that have different approaches to growing an agency, perhaps agencies that are using software to bring in clients, or agencies that are using events to connect with their clients more often. I want to kind of get into the heads of these agency founders that are doing things in an interesting way, and share what they're doing with a wider community of agency founders, so that we can all learn and take lessons from each of these episodes, apply it to what we're doing, so that everyone listening can build their agency faster, scale up, improve their retention of clients, find new ways of acquiring clients, do achieve all of that. And that's what I'm hoping we can achieve with this podcast, is just helping agency owners get access to some really amazing information.
Well, it's good to see. I call it sharing movement. When you actually are sharing your best practices, experiences, so other people can join in and learn. I think that time is really over, when companies were really hiding the way they were succeeding and why, what were the reasons, what were the processes they were using. So I'm really glad you are on that wave, and I hope more companies will learn from this and will be sharing their best practices areas so we can build a strong network of agencies and maybe other companies later on. Well, fantastic. Thank you for your time. We'll be wrapping up right now. And I just wanted to remind our listeners if they could leave a rating, 5-star rating maybe on iTunes. And thank you for joining and keep listening. The next episode will be coming out soon. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. Thanks for listening to this episode of the 10x Your Agency podcast. If you're interested in acquiring more leads for your business, I'd like to invite you to a free webinar that I'll be hosting on how to acquire 300% more leads from your website without increasing your traffic. In this webinar, I'll be sharing how you can turn your website into a lead generation machine, 4 strategies on how you can boost your form submissions by 300%, and much more. So if you're interested, all you need to do is go to Google, type in Leadformly, acquire more leads. That's Leadformly, spelled Leadformly, acquire more leads. And the landing page to register for the webinar should appear at the top. As I said, it's completely free and we run this webinar every single week. So once again, thanks for listening to this week's episode and stay tuned for next week's episode of the 10x Your Agency podcast.